Awesome. First of all, I'd like to thank UQ NeuroTech for asking me to speak here today. I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate everyone for coming from philosophy and everything. It's nice to see everyone. So my name is Cas. A little bit about me. I'm doing my honours in mathematics, but the reason I'm here talking about this topic is because in my undergrad, I did also an extended major in philosophy, and I was the secretary and president of UQ Student Philosophy Association a couple of years ago, so I'm also here in part to represent them as well. And today I'm just going to be talking about the ethics and metaphysics of neurotechnology. So before I begin, I just want to explain a little bit about, I guess, what philosophy is and why it needs to be here today, I guess. So philosophy, for those of you who don't know, well, my definition of it, it's basically just asking questions. So it's asking what is real and who are we, and all these big questions about the world and reality and what we should be doing. Those are kind of the questions that philosophy aims to tackle. And philosophy is broken up into 5 main sub-disciplines. And yeah, today I'm going to be talking about 2 of them. So one of them is ethics and one of them is metaphysics. So I'll just explain what they are. So ethics is, hopefully you're all kind of familiar, but it's asking questions about the actions that we ourselves should take, either as individuals or as society, to move towards the good. And more so than that, it asks what is the good and should we be moving towards it? And those kinds of questions. And metaphysics is kind of a little bit more typical for what you might think of when you think of philosophy. It's asking, you know, is this table real, and what is time, and who are we as selves, and what is consciousness? So that is the metaphysics part of it. Now, I just did want to mention that even though I know this is an ethics and neurotechnology night, I thought it was important also to include the metaphysics because, one, it's really interesting and it's a really important part of this topic, I think. And secondly, because our ethical decisions will necessarily be intertwined with our metaphysical opinions. So what we believe consciousness is going to affect the way that we behave about neurotechnology. So I think it's interesting to look at them both together. Yep, thank you. Okay, so just before I get into this bit, I guess I'll give you an outline of what I'm going to be talking about today. And some of the questions we're going to look at are what makes neurotechnology different from other technologies? And what unique privacy issues arise from neurotechnology? How should we manage trade-offs between privacy and well-being? What is the self and what is consciousness? So I'm going to kind of be talking about these, but I just did want to mention that my goal here tonight is not to give you a yes or no answer about anything. Philosophy is about asking questions, and you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone in philosophy who will give you a hard yes or a hard no on any answer. So today is about exploring different topics and trying to get us thinking about things, because it's important, even if we don't have the answers, to at least be asking the questions. And so I guess I'm going to go through some of the issues in ethics, and we're going to look at how we can trade off, or how the trade-off might look between some of the positive things that neurotechnology can bring us. And at the end, I'm going to talk a bit more about the metaphysical side of things. So yeah, let's get started. The first thing I wanted to do was talk about the role of ethics in technology more generally. Because for someone, if you're more in the technical side of things, maybe you think it doesn't have a role to play in the development of new technology. But science, technology, and ethics have always kind of gone together. And I think that they always should. So if we ever kind of disengage ethics from science, I think we've kind of turned down the wrong path as society. So I wanted to give us like some examples. So one of my favorite examples is cloning, specifically human cloning. So back in the early 2000s, we were kind of developing technology to clone new things. So we were cloning animals. And the question kind of turned to human cloning. So, and it was a question of, okay, are we able to do this? But then the broader question is like, should we be doing this? And so what happened was UN got together, similar how they have done for neurotechnology, and they put out kind of a statement that said they did not believe that we should be doing human cloning. And so a lot of countries now have banned that. So it's not a question of whether we have the technology to clone humans. The question was like, okay, should we really be doing this right now? And the answer seemed to be no. So that's some like an upper bound on technology that's put there by ethics. And a more recent example is autonomous vehicles, so self-driving cars, and that's a technology that's currently being developed. And I've always been really interested by this debate because there's this really interesting question you have of what happens if a self-driving car is driving down a road and something bad happens, and it has to make the decision between swerving to the right and killing an old lady, or swerving to the left and killing a child. So what happens when it has to make that decision? Well, it doesn't make that decision. The engineers who are coding the car are making that decision. And they need to be asking these questions of what is the right thing for that car to be doing. They can't just leave it blank, okay? It needs to be programmed to do something. And those questions are ethical questions that need to necessarily be infused within the technology. So I think this is a really pertinent example here. Just quickly, I'll mention medical ethics. Surely you have heard of this, and topics like euthanasia, genetic data, and that sort of thing, genetic privacy, are all really, really big topics. So I think that's a really important part of it as well, but surely you've heard of that before. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with what I think is kind of the most basic issue, probably the one you've all thought about before, and that is privacy with neurotechnology. So when I was thinking about this issue, I was thinking, what makes mental privacy more important than other kinds of privacy? So if you attach an electrode to my knee, I don't really care that much. You don't know anything about me. But if you attach an electrode to my brain and you're able to see my emotions in real time, maybe my thoughts in the future, then that's kind of a much bigger deal to me. And so I think the answer is that we think of the brain as the self, right? And that's something that we kind of want to protect, because protecting our mental privacy is protecting ourself. And I think something that you might not know, because I didn't know before I started researching it, was the lack of anonymity there is in neural data. So I've heard people saying that neural data is it's like a fingerprint. It's unique. So it can be really hard to anonymize it. So if companies are collecting it, everyone's going to know it's yours. And so there's this saying that there does not exist perfect cybersecurity. We can never preempt every single cyber attack. So we can never permanently shut the doors on someone corrupting, even especially a Neuralink inside your head, so maybe you can't turn it off or something. You can never preemptively stop the possibility of hackers getting in there and getting your neural data. And maybe that sounds too dystopian, too dramatic, but I mean, people get hacked all the time. I think if we were all walking around with neural data, I think we can kind of see it as a very, very strong possibility depending on who you are. Of course, having access to neural data is going to make you more susceptible to blackmail and everything, and all the issues I'm sure you can imagine. A little other one I just wanted to mention, because I think it's funny how you can look on either side of it. It's the advertising. So for me, I get that weird feeling of I'm living in dystopia if I think that the ads are going to be exactly targeted at what my neural data is doing, because they've tracked my emotions as I've looked at every single picture on the internet. And so I find that a bit weird, but you also might look at it from a different angle and be like, great, I want to optimize my advertising experience. So I just wanted to put that in there as well. So yeah. No, exactly. Just advertising straight to the brain. Okay, this is a fun kind of one I wanted to talk about, and this is more my thinking of what could happen, but also not so much. This one on the side, I called it mindset discrimination, but I was thinking about it because I was listening to a podcast, and it was kind of this thought experiment of, we're living in the future, and you're working for a pretty big company, and they have their company merch is a headset that reads your neural data. Okay, and in order to join your company calls, you need to be wearing this headset. I don't think that seems outside of the realm of possibility. And then I was just thinking about all the little mundane things, is your employer then allowed to discriminate against you based on your mindset, based on your neural data? And I was thinking, two different individuals, let's say they have the same work output, but one of them is 10% more bored when they're at work. And then their employee knows that because they can see the brain waves, and they know that person's more bored at work. And when the time comes to, if they have to fire someone, who are they going to fire? It's obviously the person who's more bored, even if their output is exactly the same. Another example of this, and this was kind of in the podcast that I was listening to, was if you just, again, in a company, if you're asking for a raise or something and your employer is able to read that you're not that serious about it, maybe you're not that confident, you're not feeling that angry, you're kind of just asking because you want it, they're not going to give it to you, right? Whereas if we were able to preserve our mental privacy, we have the amazing buffer thing of speech where we get to choose what we say, and we get to say, I really want to raise, even though maybe we don't really want that. So I think that's kind of an interesting kind of menial example of how every day we could be discriminated against based on our mindset, which we can't really control. This one is a little bit more speculative, but I think it's interesting. And this is preemptive arrest. So I was thinking, what happens if we eventually get enough neural data that we can start like seeing patterns in it? And people start to notice that, okay, 1 week before we arrest people, this is what their brain data looks like. 1 hour before someone commits a crime, they have these spikes in their patterns of their brain. Or even like trace it back to childhood. Everyone who turned out to be a psychopath had these brain patterns when they were children. And the question is like, are we allowed to act on that? Can we arrest someone an hour before we think they're about to commit a crime because their neural data matches exactly the patterns of everyone else who's committed a crime? And I think it's really interesting because it breaks down the barrier between intention and action. And yeah, I just think it's very interesting if we would have to face that debate one day. And I don't know, also, I'm again framing this like it's a problem. Maybe you think it's amazing and our crime rate will go to 0 and we'll like get all the would-be criminals. So I think it's interesting. And there's also a really interesting movie from 2002 called The Minority Report, which is like exactly this problem. So if you want to watch that, then you can. The next one, thank you. This is, again, just a smaller issue. I think, not a smaller issue, but I'm just going to talk about it a little bit. So this is about exacerbating inequalities with technology. Now, I think this is true for all new technology that comes out. Who is going to have access to it? Is it going to be expensive? Is that going to mean that only the most wealthy people in the world have access to it? And what is that going to mean? Now, the reason I think this is different from, like neurotechnology is different from other technology is because of the potential it could have to impact our abilities. So, for example, take cars. Even if I can't afford like the newest Tesla car, it's kind of fine, right? Because even so, I can afford a car and I can get from A to B, and it doesn't really matter that I don't have access to the latest car technology. We're still essentially on equal playing fields, right? Or, for example, smartphones. Okay, it might be annoying to get around this world without like a smartphone, but you can essentially do it. It doesn't really change your ability to do anything. But I was thinking with neurotech, if we're eventually able to, let's say anyone who has an implanted neural device has like 100 more points of IQ, or can learn things at 10 times the speed. I feel like that's such a big difference. So everyone who has that is essentially going to be just put so far ahead in the race that these inequalities are just going to keep exacerbating themselves because you get the Neuralink because you have enough money to afford it. You become 10 times as smarter, then you get to like, you can make more money because you're smarter, and then it just kind of exacerbates that. So I thought that was kind of interesting to highlight how this neurotechnology might be different from other technologies in that sense. And okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was, it's kind of this famous philosophical thought experiment called the experience machine. And I would like to pose it to you guys, and then I'm going to ask you perhaps what you would do. So the experience machine is a very simple concept. I think it was Nozick who came up with it. And the idea was, what happens if scientists build a machine that you can enter, and they have ways of stimulating your brain at the pleasure centers and optic nerve and everything, such that when you're in the experience machine, it's exactly like real life. You cannot tell the difference between that and real life, and you can make it as amazing as you want it to be. So every day you're just free, you're like frolicking in the woods, whatever you do on your days where you're super happy. So this is what the experience machine does. And the simple question is, would you enter? And I will say there's no time dilation. It's not the fact that you can enter the experience machine, live an entire lifetime, and then come out and 1 hour has passed, because in which case maybe it's a different answer. But I would like to ask a poll now. So I'll say, hands up if you would enter the experience machine. Okay, hands up if you would not. So here we have a pretty large consensus for would not, right? Because I think we still have this value for authenticity and that sort of thing. But why did I bring this up? I brought it up because in like 20 years' time, we're probably going to have the technology that is able to change your neural patterns, right? I don't know how long it's going to take, but that is where the technology is leading us. So I just think it's interesting that in who knows how long time, we will actually might be posed with this dilemma in real life. Because you might be able to put on a headset, it stimulates your pleasure centers, and you can have to choose between lying in bed all day, just like, in your happy place, as opposed to like going to work and working all day. So I just think it's interesting because this might be like a philosophy experiment brought to life in a few years. Okay, and this is my last slide on the ethics side of things. So I've talked a lot about the negatives. So I've talked about privacy concerns, discrimination, experience machines, exacerbating inequalities. I haven't talked about military use because I think it's pretty clear how this technology could be used there. But I also don't want to undersell the benefits of this technology. And it's already been talked about a lot, but a large percentage of people are struggling with mental illnesses, and it's thought that neurotechnology could be a way forward with this to help people. So if 50% of the population is living a much, much better life because of neurotechnology, that's clearly something we need to consider, right? Also, increased speed of communication. If we can communicate 10 times as fast, what does that mean for society? How much more could we get done? Could we improve society more? Also, just giving communication to people who weren't born with it is another thing as well. So on this side, we do have exacerbating inequalities, but it also could be decreasing genetic or accidental inequalities that we have. Increased happiness, question mark. I think we've talked about that. Physical illnesses is another one. So the people who are getting Neuralinks first are going to be quadriplegics, because it's about they can stimulate the spinal cord and the central nervous system, and they can help people regain feeling who have lost that. And I think that's amazing technology. We shouldn't kind of turn our back on it straight away. Also, increased intelligence. Maybe if we're all a lot more intelligent and can learn kung fu in a minute and all this kind of thing, society might be a lot better. We might be having a lot of fun. Things could be a lot better. I don't know. I don't think it's, maybe we'll move into transhumanism. We'll move beyond humanity. So who knows? There's lots of possibilities for this. So I just wanted to highlight that the point of ethics in general and ethics tonight is not to say yes or no to neurotechnology. It's to kind of try and look at this trade-off that we're making and try to kind of maximize this good while minimizing the risk of this bad thing happening. And I did want to mention there is some ethical tools that we use for this. So one of the main, I think it's kind of the main ethical theories in modern society is utilitarianism. So which is basically the greatest good for the greatest number. So you're basically just doing an expected value calculation and trying to maximize the good. And the good, it's debatable. It could be happiness, could be flourishing. There's different definitions. But I think it's kind of a tool we can maybe use to apply to a situation like this and see it as a way to kind of weigh up all this good and see how we can kind of mitigate these concerns in order to kind of maximize the good that neurotech could do in the future. Yes, so that's all I have to say on the ethics side of things. I will quickly move on to metaphysics. Oh, I've got plenty of time. I must be talking at 1.5 speed. I'll slow down then. Okay, so metaphysics. I did already explain a little bit what metaphysics was, so I will just move on straight onto the next slide. Yes, so one of the most important issues in metaphysics is this idea of continuity of self. And that's basically the problem of how do we know that you are the same person today as you were yesterday or 10 years ago? And it's kind of this idea of, are you the same person today as you were 10 years ago? Or even the day before, or even 1 second before. And I would like to tell you all a story about a boat, well, a ship rather. So there's a famous thought experiment in philosophy. It's called the ship of Theseus. And it's meant to kind of demonstrate this idea, this continuity of self. So basically the idea is there's this famous ship, the ship of Theseus. And I believe the story is it's sitting on the ocean next to this town. And it's a famous ship because it was Theseus's. I can't remember what he did with it. But the people wanted to preserve this ship, basically. But then, 5 years goes by, and, the oars get a bit damaged. So the townspeople replace the oars because they want to keep it in good condition. Another 10 years goes by, and there's a hole in the hull, okay? And then the townspeople, they want to repair it, right? And so the thought experiment is, okay, 100 years down the line, every single piece of wood from the original ship of Theseus has been changed. And the question is, well, is it still the ship of Theseus? And the way that that's meant to relate to continuity of self is that, well, over time, our biological, all of our cells regenerate in 10 years, my entire substrate will be different, right? Then how do I know, am I the same person is the question. And there are two main schools of thought about this. So one school of thought, which is less popular, but I'll still mention it, is like we are the same person because we are made of the same biological substrate. So I can't remember what it's called, maybe the substrate view or something. So I'm the same person I was yesterday because I'm made of the same physical stuff. And the second more popular view is psychological continuity. So I am the same person I was 10 years ago because there is some psychological link of memories that links us, right? So I can remember who I was yesterday, they can remember who I was the day before. You know, myself at 10 years old can remember myself at 5 years old. There are different versions of this. Not everyone thinks it's memory, but some people think it's just some unique psychological link. And so yeah, I was thinking about these issues when it relates to neurotech. So if you hold the substrate view, so the biological view, it's going to be kind of difficult. Like you need to have some, like, you need to take some serious questions when you've got like a Neuralink implanted in your brain and you're no longer made of the same substrate. Or if we're ever able to upload our memories to the cloud, is that going to be the same substrate? Is that going to be the same self? So what will, these people kind of have to face that issue when this neurotech comes along. And for the psychological continuity view, things like memory evasion or even just altering our memories or altering our emotions, like how can we preserve this psychological link if literally we have the technology to break it? So I think it's a case where neurotechnology will be able to teach us a lot about the self, because if I upload half my mind to the cloud and I still feel like myself, you know, and I delete half my memories and I still feel like myself, well, maybe it can teach us a little bit more about this issue. But on the other side, we need to have neurotechnology that looks at this problem and is like, okay, whatever we do with neurotech, we need to preserve the self. So we need to kind of have this conversation about what is the self, how does the self continue, and try to kind of keep that going with neurotechnology. Cool. And then sorry for the very distracting graphic, but the last thing I'm going to talk about is consciousness. And it's kind of one of my favorite issues, and I thought it was very relevant to neurotechnology. So the problem basically is that we don't really know what consciousness is, right? Like, we don't know why we experience things the way that we experience things. We don't know why a bat or a dog experience things the way they experience things. And we have no idea what's going to change if we introduce like silicon components to the brain, or if we introduce like cloud, like uploading something to the cloud. We have no idea what that's going to do to consciousness. So I was kind of looking at this from the angle of, if we do develop this neurotechnology, we're going to learn so much about consciousness. Because if I'm able to upload my consciousness to the cloud, that's insane. Like, anyone who believes that consciousness is necessarily biological is like instantly proven wrong, right? So I was more seeing this as a way that technology could teach us about consciousness. And I was also thinking it's a way to, like, maybe we can move past human consciousness. Like, who knows? Like, if we upload ourselves to the cloud, maybe that will be like, I don't know, the next version of consciousness. So this was more a thing about what neurotechnology can maybe do for philosophy. And in any way, when neurotechnologists are developing this, they will need to keep in mind that, like, we need to preserve consciousness. So if we eventually want to move to a place where we move beyond the biological, we're going to need to preserve this pretty important thing, consciousness. So that's what I had to say about that. Yes, this is my conclusion. I'm nearly finished. I guess what I wanted everyone to take away from this was, I guess, like, these conversations are really important to be having now as the technology is being developed. So I think it's no good to go 50 years, have these issues arise and have not talked about it. So I think it's really great that these are being talked about now, when perhaps it seems far-fetched that the technology would lead us to these places, but it's no good if we wake up in 50 years, these things are all happening, and we are like, damn, we wish we'd kind of thought about it a little bit more. So I guess thank you everyone for thinking about this issue with me, and yeah, thanks for being here tonight.